begin this part of the Psalm 63 from the beginning. Lord, thee my God I'll early seek, my soul doth thirst for thee. My flesh longs in a dry parched land wherein no waters be, that I thy power may behold and brightness of thy face, as I have seen thee heretofore within thy holy place. Since better is thy love than life, my lips thee praise shall give. I in thy name will lift my hands and bless thee while I live. Even as with marrow and with fat my soul shall filled be, then shall my mouth with joyful lips sing praises unto thee. When I do thee upon my bed, remember with delight, and when on thee I meditate in watches of the night. In shadow of thy wings I'll joy, for thou mine help hast been. My soul thee follows hard, and me thy right hand doth sustain. We'll sing these 6 stanzas, verses 1 to 8 of the 63rd Psalm, Lord, thee my God.
Lord, thee my God, I early seek, my soul doth thirst for thee. My flesh longs in the dry parched land, wherein no waters be. That I thy power may behold, and brightness of thy face, as I have seen thee heretofore within thy holy place. Since better is thy love than life, my lips thee praise shall give. I in thy name will lift my hands and bless thee while I live. Even as with marrow and with fat, my soul shall live here. Then shall my mouth with joyful lips sing praises unto thee. When I do thee upon my bed, remember with delight, and when on thee I meditate in watches of the night. In shadow of thy wings I'll joy, for thou my help hast been. My soul thee follows hard, and thee thy right hand doth sustain.
Now, one of the committee members said to me after this morning's service, well, you'll be pleased that all your duties are now over. And didn't tell me then that I also had to conduct part of the evening service and then chair tonight's meeting. So all my duties weren't over, and I suppose after all that Mr. Blaze has been saying to us, that makes him a false prophet. Because the thing that he prophesied did not come to pass. Now, as I was thinking tonight of this last meeting of the conference and how much we've enjoyed one another's company and fellowship, it's a wonderful thing really how these experiences of God's grace tie us to certain places along our journey. And I don't think any of us who have been here over the weekend and sensed the presence of the Spirit of God will easily forget our gathering here. And it reminded me of a story that the late Professor Macmillan told me in our own manse. The first communion that we had in Snizort, he was the senior minister, and he was very reminiscent of days in Aberdeen, and he was telling a story about one of his elders in Aberdeen and something that happened in the session. Now, these things are meant to be private, so don't tell anyone. It troubled him a little bit that there was, any time somebody came for membership to the session, his elders were very reluctant to ask questions. You know, they left it up to him. So he was determined that at this particular communion season, if anybody came for membership, he would make sure that the elders asked questions and in interviewing the candidates who came for membership. And one young lassie came to the session. She was a student in Aberdeen, and he started the ball rolling and started the questions, and then he decided, well, that's enough, and he immediately put this particular elder on the spot and said, well, now you ask her something. So without flinching, the elder turned to the girl and said, well, now, my dear, how do you like Aberdeen yourself? And the girl was just as sharp. She said, I love Aberdeen. She said, it was in Aberdeen I came to know the Lord. And if any of us are asked, how do you like Tarbert, I think that we'll be able to answer along similar lines. Now, tonight's meeting is very informal, and I have the great privilege tonight of being able publicly to say how much I have enjoyed meeting and sharing in this conference with Mr. Blaze from London. And he is a relative stranger amongst us. He's a stranger because we don't know him, but he's a relative stranger because he's our brother in Christ. That's what makes him a relative. And it's been wonderful to share the same gospel with him. And I'm sure that his own background and his own story will make fascinating listening. So I'm going to ask him very simply if he would share with us a little tonight of something of his background and how the Lord dealt with him and brought him to love the Christ of the gospel that has brought us here together. And if anybody wants to come in at any stage and to ask anything or to interrupt in any way, please feel free to do so. And I think I'm going to sit down now, and I think to make it more informal, we'll ask Mr. Blaze to remain seated as well. But I hope that won't hinder those at the back, will it? Would? Much faster, I guess. This isn't exactly what I intended. Mr. Blaze. Yes. Can you tell us something about your own birthplace and the culture into which you were born and in which you were brought up.
I was born in the island of Dominica, used with the Haiti or Hispaniola, but in the Leeward Islands and seceded to the Windward Islands, sort of the Eastern Caribbean section, in a little island named Dominica. Now, the island got its name because in 3rd November 1492, as you know, Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama and others besides, with the license of the papacy and in the discovery and setting up not only new discoveries, but establishing Roman Catholicism. The reason for my island being called Dominica, it was because it was discovered on a Sunday. And old Christopher Columbus, being a staunch Roman Catholic, he remembered the priest on the altar when the priest said, Dominus vobiscum, the Lord be with you. So he called the island Dominica. I came from a village called Beriqua, which is Belqua, really, beautiful cross. It's a Roman Catholic country. I was brought up, there were 6 of us and 2 adopted children. In a big old home, we had lots of land. They were not farms that are similar to your crofting, or crofting system. God was merciful to us as a family. We were not poor, neither were we rich. We had lots of cattle, so I was brought up on milk. But one thing I did not like as a boy was butter making. And that thing was tedious and long, and when all your friends were playing, you had to be there. Of course, we used to make it in butter, shaking the thing day in day. And that was the thing that really got me. Notwithstanding, God was very gracious to us. But my background, secondly, was Roman. It was a Roman Catholic background. We were very staunch as Roman Catholic, most of us on the island. We can remember, or I can remember, as a boy, we had some folks who came to preach in the village square. We used to call them Sobruks. It was a kind of a nickname for a Protestant. And they were preaching the gospel. Now looking back, now to me what they were doing, they were simply, as the priest mentioned to us, they were simply proselytizing. So we were organized as a group of boys, especially the upper classes, not to make trouble for these missionaries, but to be volunteers, because then tracts were distributed, and to be a volunteer, and then you take as many tracts as possible, and of course you destroy them anyway. So that was the whole philosophy. But it was, I think, the first seed. Let me go back on in terms of my family. We were 3 boys and 3 girls. I was the eldest boy, and therefore some responsibility then was placed on me. But something dreadfully happened in my family. When I was about 11, my mother suddenly died on Christmas Day. And that was very, very hard, because Mom and I were very close. And it took me weeks to get over that. Nevertheless, the Lord God was merciful. I didn't know him then, but he preserved us, and Father then took up the responsibility. And I'll never forget when we all went to bed, and Mother then said to my eldest sister to ensure that we were in bed, we had said our prayers. So we did. But about midnight, I sensed there were lots of folks in my home. So I got up, and I said, well, what's happening? But no one would say. But the thing that got me was the matriarch in the village. Generally, she doesn't come into the home except if there is a crisis. So she was there, and I went to her and said, well, what is happening? And she wouldn't tell me. Of course, as a little boy, you wind your way through the legs of other people. And I got to Mama's room, and she had a old Victorian four-poster, with the canopy, and you need a step ladder to get in. And that was the kind of bed. So when I got in, Father was sitting to the right side of the bed, and Mammy was in bed, and Father had Mammy's head on his arm. And as I walked in, I heard Mammy saying to Dad, "You promise me that A, you will bring the children up, they'll be disciplined and schooled. You promise me that." And Father said, "Yes, I do promise." And then I saw Mammy's head went, and of course, Mother died. I didn't think it was death because Mother wasn't sick. And the reaction of my dad, then I sensed there was something wrong. And that image will never leave me until the day of my death. However, of course, the family, things changed and so on. Religion then increased. Father embraced a kind of semi-colonial mentality. Namely, the first boy was for the church, second boy was for medicine. And of course, my brother, who was the second boy, succeeded. He went for dentistry. He was practicing in California. He was extracting a tooth. He fainted and he gave it up. And so I was second boy. I was for the church, as he thought. But when I became saved, when I became a Christian, then Father did not like that very much. And then it meant that the whole family structure then is somewhat upset. Notwithstanding, after about 10 years, I went home with fear and trepidation. And of course, my flight was delayed, as you have in all those little countries. People don't go by the timetable. I mean, you can't rush under the sun anyway. You collapse. You just take your time. And when I got in, he was out, and he had to go back to his farms or his holdings. But when 2 days later he came, and I can remember standing in what we called a yard, the top of the yard, what you would call the driveway into the house. And he came, and I can remember he gave me such a hug, and we stood there for 10 years. We hadn't seen each other, and we wept and wept and wept. But of course, my heart was pounding like anything. Then we went into the parlor, and then he said to me, "Sit down." Now, in my tradition, when the patriarch said to you to sit down, then you are in a place of favor. Usually he sits down, and then you sit. And then the first question he asked me was simply this: "Now, son, tell me all about it." I said, "All about what, Dad?" He said, "All about becoming a Christian." I said, "Well, how do you know I'm a Christian?" He said, "Well, I have 10 years of your letters, and there's a change, and I want to know how it came about." So I sat down and told him how it came about. He didn't butt in. He listened attentively, carefully, and when I was done, he said, "Okay, now I can see." That was all he said. He didn't say more than that. Then I had to preach in the village, and of course, being kind of what you would call, probably what you call it, a headman of the village or whatever. So he had the authority to rope everybody, including the chief of police, to come and listen to preaching. What his motives were, I don't know. But anyway, they came, and God gave me opportunity then to preach. Even a dumb and deaf mute I had as an uncle, he ordered him to come. So he had to come anyway. And God helped me to preach the gospel there. And my father, that was the last time I preached before him, or he was in the congregation, and my other folks. As for coming to UK, going back again, I came to UK in 1962. After the war, as you know, many West Indians fought in the Second World War on the British side and so on. And then about 1960, workers needed factories and other things. And of course, when you are in a small island, I mean, if there is one job, you have a whole tribe going for it. And the opportunity came for folks to come to England. And then father had the money. My eldest brother was given it. He went, he came, he sent the money back. Then my sister, and it was my turn, and that's how the thing worked. And when I first came to UK, the thing that it wasn't too much of a culture shock, because we had lots of Englishmen on my island. It wasn't too much of a culture shock, but people were very quiet, very reserved. They didn't say much. Everyone minded his or her business. And the homes were regimental. How did you know which was yours? I couldn't make that out. And all the homes were the same. And all the streets were the same. And there was a kind of a sameness about the whole thing. But I wasn't a Christian then, and I lived for about a couple of years. But during that time and throughout my life, one question bugged me, was, why am I here? And that was the thing I wanted to know. I went to my priest, I can remember, in Mile End, the Guardian Angel Church there in Mile End, and I posed the question to the priest. Of course, he couldn't give me an answer and so on. But it was one Sunday I visited a friend who came from home, and when you leave home, your parents give you a kind of, what do you say, a memento? Some little thing to remember home. And what his parents gave him was a Bible. So it seemed to me somebody was a Christian in that family. And he had it there. So when I was leaving that Sunday evening, he said to me, I have a book for you. Because he knew I was religious. I said, yes. And he brought out that beautifully bound leather Bible. And I was shocked. And he said, it's for you. I said, for me? He said, yes.
Three wise men. All right, well, it's been requested that we sing standing, so we'll give it all that we've got.
anything. I sat down. He said, Father Carpenter, spoken to me. I said, yes. I said, well, one thing I want to ask you, sir, is this. You explain to me how come reading the Bible can change my thinking. Why is that? What's so special about it? I know that the Pope finds what he teaches us in the Holy Bible and in tradition. I know all about tradition. But now I'm reading the Bible for the first time. Then he began with the Virgin. I said, look, sir, I'm not interested in Virgin Mary. I'm not interested in St. Paul, nor St. Peter, nor whosoever saint. Only the Bible. Why is it it changed my mind? And I would not give in because I was determined to find an answer. The man could have explained it away. I wouldn't be the wiser because I just didn't know. I simply wanted an honest question. And he got annoyed with me. And he threw me out. You are a stubborn lad. And I was excommunicated from my church. And it was winter. I was depressed. I went home. I cried all the way home. Why should the man treat me like this simply because I asked him a simple question? It has something to do with the Bible. He certainly doesn't like the Bible. So I decided the only thing to do, I couldn't go back to church because I was thrown out, you're excommunicated. And as far as concerned, there was no other church. Because catechism says, the Roman dogma says, when you're outside of the church, you're outside of salvation. And that was it. And I was lost. But I knew that I couldn't be that lost if I could read the Bible and find enjoyment. So I started to read my Bible. I used to get up 5 o'clock in the morning just to read from 5 to 7, to read and read and read and read. And get up quickly, wash and dress, and by the time go to work and come home, have a quick wash. And from 6 to 10, I would read and read and read and read and read. I just couldn't put it down. And so one day I was passing outside of a tube station, Mile End, and some people were handing leaflets. I was in that state for about 6 to 8 months. You want to interject here? Any questions? Or you want me to go on? All right. So people were distributing leaflets about the Bible. I said, oh, that's good. Probably there are people in the UK who believe the Bible, because as far as I'm concerned, that nobody believed the Bible. That's what I thought. So I took that little thing, and it was Emmaus Bible School in Hertfordshire, offering little correspondent courses to teach people to understand the Bible. I said, that's a good idea. So I filled that in. I sent that. They sent me a little booklet. I got up early. I filled it. I sent. Within a month, within a fortnight, I exhausted their material. And the chairman got a little worried. He wrote and he said, I want to come to see you. He detected something. So he came, and I met him at Liverpool Street. So he went around the city and showed me St. Paul's and so on and so forth. I didn't, and explained the Mile Square and so on. Then he said to me, which church do you go to? I said, well, I was thrown out of my church, and there isn't any other church anyway. He looked at me. He said, well, which church do you go to? I said, sir, there isn't any other church. I don't know of any other church. And he didn't get it at first. And he said, well, do you go to any church in this country? I said, yes, I was going to the Guardian Angel, but the priest threw me out because I asked him the question about the Bible. He said, do you go to any other church? And I couldn't make head and tail out of what he was telling me. Because which other church is there? I mean, you couldn't go to a Protestant church. Protestants were bad because the Jesuits taught us that Protestantism began with Henry VIII. And because the Pope wouldn't give him a divorce, to divorce Catherine of Aragon to Marion Boleyn, so he packed his bag and left the church. And then the Jesuits say, well, if you want to see the source of the river is where it begins. Protestantism, they begin there. And I had no time for you, Protestant. Oh, no Protestant, don't come in near my door. So as far as I'm concerned, that my church, that was the church, because that's all I knew, because I came from an island. That was where I was born and bred and educated and so on and so forth. And those Jesuits, they are not only good in their head, but boy, when they get that thing into you, it's very difficult to shake it off. Because when they have you from not until, you've had it. Anyway, then he said, well, there are other Christians. I said, Christians? Well, aren't we all Christians? He said, yes. I said, what do you mean by Christian? I said, what you mean, are there people who believe that there are people who believe the Bible? He said, yes. I said, are there? He said, yes. I said, I do. I said, you believe the Bible? He said, and he had an old tatty. I have never seen a tatty briefcase in my whole life. And he opened that tatty old briefcase, and here he took his Bible, well-thumbed Bible. I said, you have been using your Bible for a long time. He said, yes, he was an older man, and he was a real Christian man. Then the other thing he brought out from his bag was a little package, and he opened it up, and he said, do you want a sandwich? I said, what? He said, a sandwich. I said, what do you mean? He said, one of these. No, I've never seen a sandwich before. To me, there were two little bits of bread with a third bit of bread in the middle. And he called it a sandwich. I went, you English, you're funny. Anyway, I mean, I had to be polite. Don't ask me what was in it, because I've never touched the thing before. So I took one and I ate it, I must confess, with real trepidation, because I just didn't know what was in the middle. I knew there was bread on the right, bread on the left, but what was it that was in the middle? But then, to me, a man who used his Bible like that would not give me anything bad. So I must confess, I tried to eat it, and I did eat it. Anyway, then he said to me, would you like me to read a portion of the Bible? I said, yes, sir. So he read a portion, but it was not his reading. It was how he read. And then he said, do you want me to pray? I said, yeah. And I was expecting him to take his prayer book, you see, and to say a little prayer. And he closed his eyes and he prayed. For the first time in my life, the man was praying without a prayer book. And what he was saying made sense. I said, that's the thing I did around my little table when I asked God to be my master. How comes he knew what to say? I didn't see anything. Anyway, he said, I'll get you in touch with somebody who believes the Bible. I said, would you, sir? He said, yes. Mind you, I didn't trust people's word because they say one thing and they didn't keep their words anyway. But my father taught me then when you give your word, you've got to keep it. So, a few days later, I heard from the London City Mission man come to see me. He was only, quarter of a mile or less from my home. I got the letter on the Monday. He told me come to see him on the Wednesday. Oh, I was excited. For the first time in my life, I was going to meet a man who believes the Bible. And you know, I was so excited. I went to work. I came back. I had a shower. I put on my best shirt, you know. And I put on my best suit and my shoes were polished. And I was so excited, I took a taxi. And when I got to my destination, the taximan was so annoyed with me. He charged me 5 bob. Now, 5 bob in those days was a lot of money. And he thought I was having him on. But I gave him a tip too. So. And he thought I was very strange. So I knocked and I heard that man coming down. I said, Mr. Blaze. I said, is he all right? Anyway, said he received the letter from the Mr. Harris. I said, yes, we had a little chat and so on and so forth. He said, which church do you go to? I told him what had happened. He said, well, would you like to come to my church? I said, oh, you go to church, sir? He said, yeah. I said, where is your church? He said, on the Burdett Road. Now, the Burdett Road was the market where I shopped. I said, there isn't any church there. We have the Guardian Angel. And on the Burdett Road, there is a Jewish tabernacle there. He said, well, that's my church. East London Tabernacle Baptist Church. I said, how can you mix Jew and Baptist together? East London Tabernacle was, as far as I'm concerned, there was a word in the Old Testament, and he was talking about Baptists. I said, well, how could you mix the two together, Jews and Baptists? He said, no, that's the name of the church. And the combination didn't make sense to me. And I said, are you sure that's a good place to go? And he said, yes. I said, do you preach the Bible there? Or do you teach the Bible there? He said, yes. I said, okay, I'll come. So he took me home, and that was the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. The 3 days were like eternity. Anyway, Sunday morning, service was at 11. I got up at 5. I washed several times. I shaved, I dressed, I redressed, and so on and so forth. And by 10:30, I left home. It's only 2 minutes down the road. And I walked up and down and up and down. And he came spot on time, 10 to 11. And then we went in. When we got in, they handed me a green book. I said, oh. And we went in. And I was shocked. The place was bare. I said, that's not a church. How can you worship in a bare place? Because I was used to a Roman church, lots of statues, stained glasses, candles, and all the saints. The place was empty except empty wooden chairs and a little stage and a desk, what I call. And that was it. I said, Protestantism, they haven't got a sense, not even of decency, of artistry. There's no art involved in their worship. It's a dismal place. I was quarreling with myself. Anyway, my friend invited me, so, that was his empty place, so I sat down, and people started to come. Then there was some music playing, but I couldn't decipher where the music was coming from. Anyway, suddenly, a door to my right opened, and a little man walked up. Then he went up the stage, and he sat down, and he had red fluorescent socks. And when he sat down, he went... And he had a tweed suit on. I said, oh. Then a taller man, he came up. He went to the side, and he made an L turn, and he came back, he sat down. I said, oh, they have order in this place, at least. The third man, he was a little chubby fellow. He came to the middle, went in, did a zigzag, and he sat down. But the little man was sitting on his stage. There was, I'll call it a pulpit. It was something. Then suddenly the music stopped. It was dead silent. Then he stood up. He said something. What he said, he announced something, but it was a hymn. And then my friend took my book and he opened it up. And I was looking at the words. I said, oh, that's beautiful prose. That makes good sense. And then they stood and they were singing. And they seemed to sing well. It was not like the chantings I was used to. Anyway, I didn't sing, I didn't know the words, but I listened carefully. Then we sat down. Then he said, let us pray. Then suddenly everybody bowed their heads. I said, oh, I'm not going to bow my head in this place. I'm not going to close my eyes in this place because I mean that I didn't know the folks. So I decided I'll bow my head but keep my eyes open. And I really did. But it was so sad, so quiet. And I raised my head to see what was happening. The folks' heads were bowed. And then somebody moved them. And I went back. But two things impressed me that morning. The man was praying. I said, but he's not reading. He held the sides of his lectern. His eyes were closed. And I've never heard anything like this before. I said, how can man pray like this without written prayers? Because all my life, that's all we did at church, and that's how I prayed, written prayers. Then he stopped. And then several other things took place. And then he announced, we are studying the Bible. And he announced he was studying the book of Jude. So I turned to Jude because for 8 months I've been in my Bible, so I had no problem with that. It was Jude 11, and his sermon was the madness of the prophet. Oh, that man preached. The shed man, and that man could preach. Always 3 points in his sermon. Firstly, secondly, thirdly. He never departed from that until he's still alive. I can't see until this day, until the day when I last heard him. So that gives you a little history of my background and how I was brought to faith. That's what you wanted?
Yes, indeed, yes, and it's been very interesting. And perhaps now somebody would like to ask Mr. Blaze a question.
Would you say that that first day you read the Bible was the day that you found peace for your soul?
I would say so. I would say so because for the previously 18 months, that was the question that was bugging me. Really, later on I find out that was the question of the Shorter Catechism. But I didn't know anything about the Shorter Catechism. What is the chief end of man? And that was the question. Had the priest opened the thing up to me and give me any kind of what have you, because we really respected our priests. But when I read the scriptures, and as it were, when I came to Matthew 6:24, you cannot serve two masters at a time, I was forced to pray. It wasn't a question that I prayed. The tremendous pressure would force me to pray, to ask God to become my master. Of course, the pressure when I got up in the morning, I went to bed, the pressure was not as acute. And perhaps I would say, it was perhaps that Sunday afternoon, whenever it was, in about 64 in the autumn, that was the first time when God was pleased to open my eyes. Perhaps it was, but that is what I can remember of it. Yes.
Could you say something that would have caused the ministering man to get put of books in your life?
That is interesting. My call to the ministry had nothing to do with me. Absolutely nothing. I was in my church. I was quite contented. So when after a little while my pastor approached me and he said he has been sent by the church that I should become, they want me to become a deacon. I said, me? He said, yes, as far as we can see, you have the prerequisites. Then I had to submit to my church. Then, serving the church as a little while, then they called me to give up my work and to come full-time as a kind of district evangelist. That was a bigger decision, to give up my job. Because the job at the church, they were not paying much. I was simply going to get a third of what I was getting in business. And I said to myself, well, the church has the mind of Christ. I better submit. So I submitted to my church. And after a little while, my pastor came back and he said, no. Then I went to North Wales to preach in Wrexham. When I came down, or came to London that Monday morning, I met one or two folks from the church. And they said to me, have you heard? Have you heard? I said, have I heard what? But no one would tell me. Have you seen Pastor? I said, no. I had to wait on Thursday evening after the Bible study, about 9:15. I can remember that well. I went to him. I said, Pastor, what happened over the weekend? Because I've met certain folks and they kept on saying to me, have you heard, have you heard, have you seen Pastor? He said, oh, I shall tell you. What happened? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, we had a congregational meeting on Saturday. I said, did you? I didn't know that. He said, you were not supposed to know that. I said, oh, close shop in this place, eh? Anyway, he said, at that meeting, the church voted to call you to be the associate minister here. I said, me? He said, yes. Furthermore, the church has the mind of Christ. The church has decided it. There is nothing you can do about it. Good night, brother. And that was it. And that was it. It had nothing to do with me. And I tell you, you remember when the little group met and then the man said to John Knox that the little group called him. You can imagine how I didn't know whether I was coming or going. I didn't mind being on the district, but I think to be an associate minister and all the problems involved. But I had two things I could do, either rebel or submit. So I submitted to my church. In terms of how books came into my life, in the Christmas of 65, probably a year after I was converted, a friend of mine gave me a volume entitled Lectures to My Student by C.H. Spurgeon. And I wanted to know what the book was about, so I started chapter 1. I said, well, I'll read the introduction later. That thing had me in stitches. And any one of you who have read Spurgeon's Lecture to My Student, that's good. And I got so taken up with the books, I forgot the introduction. So I went to my friend, I said, where is this man lecturing? I really want to hear him. Now, he thought I was gone. He really thought I was gone. But I was in dead earnest. But when he saw I was in dead earnest and he knew I was not insane, he said to me in a typical English fashion, and did you read the introduction, sir? The man has been dead almost 100 years ago. You talk about embarrassment. So, all right. So I read the book and read the introduction. I said, well, where can I get other of that literature? So I wrote at the back of it, they had Marshall, Morgan, and Scott. So I wrote to them, and they sent me a whole set of what was called Spurgeon's Sermon, edited by a certain Mr. Cook. But I said, edited sermon? This man said, if it's edited, it all depends on the editor. I didn't like the word edited because they didn't advertise it as edit. But of course, I said I don't know what he took out or what he put in. So I wasn't the wiser. Then I said to my friend, well, if these are edited sermons, where else can we get literature from that man called Spurgeon? He said there is a firm on Chiltern Street, 78A or 78B. You write to them. They're called the Banner of Truth. They published some of that Spurgeon sermon too. So in 1975, I wrote to the Banner of Truth. I've been reading a book by C.H. Spurgeon, Lecture to My Student. I received a set of commentaries edited by said Mr. Cook from the Marshall Morgan. I've been told that you publish the man's literature. Is it possible to send me a list or what have you? And they sent me a list, and they sent me the new. They said there is a new Park Street edition, so I ordered that. I tell you, that's Spurgeon at his best. You talk about Calvinism at its best. The first 6 volume of the new Park Street Pulpit. I tell you, every single day I read a sermon on that. Every single day. To me, and one man said to me, "You will breathe Spurgeon, you will dream Spurgeon, you will die." But I don't mind who he is, I just like him. And then I discovered later what Mr. Cook did. He cut off all of Spurgeon's Calvinism and he kept what he wanted. I was disappointed. And then I started to go in. Then I began to read more. And one day I was walking, I was in a factory somewhere, and I saw 2 little books on a rubbish heap. And one was entitled Elijah. I said, "Oh, that must be the fellow in the Bible." And the other was on the sovereignty of God. Both of them were written by a said Mr. Pink. I didn't know who Pink was, whether he was pink or black or blue. It didn't bother me. So I picked the books up from the rubbish dump anyway. And when I started to read the sovereignty of God, I said, this thing is like the Spurgeon thing. And I really fell in love with that. And I read the Elijah. I said, well, this Mr. Pink must be a good man. He must have had some enemies. That's why they threw his books away. Anyway, and then then I wrote to the Banner of Truth again. I said, what else do you have? Then I read Watson's 10 Commandments, Lord's Prayer, and so on and so forth. Then I went on and on and on. So I decided, as a single man, I wasn't married, and the salary wasn't that good, but books were cheap then. So I just invested in and read Calvin's commentary, Calvin, Warfield, and Calvin and Augustine. Pretty tough going on the head, but it was good for the soul. And my love for books, and I began to patronize old bookshops, but I didn't know what to get. Until one day I saw a little somebody advertise Spurgeon's commenting on commentaries. I said, what is this about? So I ordered it. The people were in St. Leonard, somewhere in Essex. And it was showing me the best commentaries, who wrote. I said, well, that's it. That was my guide. And I went for the bookshops in London. I looked for every religious book. First I checked on Spurgeon. And I said, no, it's not in Spurgeon, it's no good. It was as simple as that. If it wasn't in Spurgeon, it wasn't good. And probably I missed quite a lot of gems. But as far as it's concerned, I didn't know. So I wasn't going to take any chances. Once bitten, twice shy. The priest kicked me up, I wasn't going to take any chances. So then with Spurgeon, then I built my own library. I just gave myself really to study, and God has been very gracious to me. So that's the connection with church and books.
Since the 80s, all this back in good romance, and even some of the Kepler and the writers, you fill in that little bit about your wife's background and your family.
I was just talking to one or two of the brethren, when was it, yesterday, this afternoon, about, we read all about the free church men, but we hear very little about their wives. Why is that? Anyway, we'll see. Well, my wife comes from that which was British Guyana, and now it's Guyana. She belonged to the same church, East London Tab, where I belonged. And how I got to know her, it was wonderful. The leader of the young people's group invited me to preach to the young folks, all the young men. And so I was preaching, and I saw this young lady there. I said, oh, she looks nice. But anyway, I didn't make much out of it. So I preached, and then when she went home, she said to her mother, Mommy, there was a young man there, and he's all geared up. And he's all tensed up, but he gave us good stuff. So the mother said, well, who is he? He said, I don't know. They call him a Blaze, but he's in the church. And Then I saw her. Then immediately saw her in the youth group. Then when she comes to church, you see her anyway. So whenever you go to church, you always, you make sure you're not looking for her, but really. But really, I was looking for her. And, well, I had to think, and it took me about a year to pluck up my courage. So I'll never forget, and I went to see her, and went to see the mother and things, because in our culture, if you like a girl, you don't tell her, you tell her parents, and and you work it out from there. But when I went to the home that day, the home was in darkness, and mother wasn't in, and she wasn't in. She was in, and you talk about romance or about fear. I said, well, what happened to your light? He said, well, we had a power cut. I said, where is mother? Where are your parents? He said, they're out. And I panicked. I said, oh dear, what do I do? She said to me, come in, we have light. The brothers and sisters were in. I said, oh. Then I stood around. He said, come in. I have Mommy. Mommy knows about you anyway. Yeah, my brothers. Here is Yvette. Here is Claudette. Here is Trevor, and so on and so forth. Mommy has just gone to the shop. Mommy will be back. And I sat there, and I said, well, let me tell you what I have come for, really. And I didn't sit down. I stood around by the door. And I said, well, I would... Back home, we say this is the first step in asking a girl to court, whether she loves you. You say, well, what I come for is to ask whether you would be willing to be my baby. Now, back home, this term means your sweetheart. You see, that's the first step. You do not say that. Now things have changed, but you do not say that to anyone if you're not serious. Furthermore, some parents require what is called a document, what we call a registered letter, and that's legal tender. You violate that and you don't marry that girl, you pay for it. Oh yes, it's pretty tough. And I said, have you ever thought of becoming the wife of a pastor? He looked at me and said, well, I've never thought of it. I said, well, you think of it. You think over it and let me know. Good night. And I took off. I took off. And God was merciful to me, so I went to see the ma'am, and we had a little chat and others besides. So that's how we met. But the courtship was long. And because she... were teachers training college, were taking a degree and so on, and then during that time I was called to the States and so on. So it was a long courtship of 5 years. I wouldn't recommend that. I wouldn't recommend that at all whatsoever. But God was merciful to us. So this is how I got to know my wife, or got to know her, and she got to know me. And God has given us a wonderful relationship. We have 2 children, Anastasia and Glenwyn. So God is good to us. So that answers your question, I trust. Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? I think perhaps we ought to have worship at this stage, and then people will be free to come and go as they wish. Well, I'd like on behalf of everybody in here tonight to thank Mr. Blaze most sincerely for sharing with us of his experiences, spiritual and otherwise. And we heard a complaint from a brother in the conference on Friday evening that he had never said "I do" before. And I think I better counsel the females. If he ever says to you, "Will you be my baby?" Just think twice before you answer. Well, I shouldn't have said that before. It's very... Kirkach Manche nicht.